You have been lied to. You have been lied to regarding the inflation rate. When you are working and you get an inflation adjustment of 3 to 4% per annum, you're actually losing, because inflation of consumer goods might be 3 to 4%, but all the things that really matter, right? Housing, education, healthcare, those kinds of things, they don't appreciate in price by 3 to 4% per annum. They appreciate in price by roughly 7 to 8% per annum. And that's because that's how quickly the monetary base is expanding. So when you're looking at USM2, so the American money supply, the supply of the US dollar, that increased in the last decades by roughly 7 to 8% per annum. And that's why houses get more and more expensive over time. That's why tuition gets more and more expensive over time, right? Consumer goods get per tenancy cheaper over time, as in it becomes easier and easier to produce that TV because of technological progress, right? So it should become easier over time to buy that TV. Thus, even though the monetary base is expanding by 7% per annum, the TV might only get expensive by, say, 3 or 4% per annum, right? Simply because it's easier and easier to produce that TV. The machines become more and more productive, etc. And competition favors the companies that are the most effective, right? There's a consolidation across companies to filter out the ones that are the best. And so you get that inflation adjustment of 3 to 4%. But let's think about how much you're actually losing when you have your money just in cash, right? Let's say 7% per annum. Let's say that's the purchasing power that you're actually losing against the things that matter. 7% per annum. How expensive is it to hold fiat currency? To hold 1,000 US dollars in fiat is as expensive as a Netflix subscription, as the cheapest Netflix subscription. And you've got $1,000 in cash laying around, not deployed in anything, then you're losing $70 per year, or roughly $6 per month. And the cheapest Netflix is between $6 to $7 US dollars per month, right? In the US. So having $1,000 in your bank account costs you pretty much the same as having a Netflix subscription. And unfortunately, this obviously scales, right? Once you've got $10,000 in your bank account, now you're losing $700 per year, or $2 every single day, or $60 per month. Once you've got $20,000 laying around that's not deployed in anything, then you could already cover the premium membership here, right? Which is $125 US dollars per month. So having $20,000 idle somewhere is as expensive as pretty extensive knowledge around investing. Now here's the fundamental problem. People that aren't used to investing, they're not used to the volatility, right? And they say, I don't want to buy, say, the S&P 500, because if I buy now the S&P 500, then the S&P 500 might go down by 30, 40, 50%. And suddenly that hard-earned cash that I worked for such a long time loses purchasing power, right? So the loss in terms of the monetary expansion isn't really that visible, right? You're starting out with 20,000 US dollars. You still have 20,000 US dollars 1 year from now. So it doesn't really feel that painful. But when the 20,000 US dollars suddenly goes down because you bought that S&P 500 ETF and you're now just at $15,000, that's really painful. And so there's several ways to counter this, right? There's a way to potentially reduce the volatility of the portfolio by not just owning the S&P 500, but by also owning crypto, by also owning gold, by also owning long-term government bonds, right? By owning all kinds of things that aren't highly correlated to one another, that in the end, those things are very unlikely going to crash all at the same time. So maybe the portfolio will not go down during bearish times by 30, 40, 50%, but maybe only by 20%. So that's one way to manage it. But it's also a psychological thing, right? It's also about feeling comfortable with some uncertainty around volatility, right? When you are certain to lose 7% per annum, and you simply have to visualize this, right? You know you're going down 7% per annum. After 3 years, you're definitely down by more than 20%. Whereas when you hold a diversified portfolio, you might be temporarily down by 20%, but after 3 years, it's rather unlikely that you're actually down in fiat terms. Here are the videos that work on YouTube. XRP will be $12,000 guaranteed, or an AI explosion, top 3 cryptos to buy in November. A lot of pushing of greed, that's what gets the clicks. What doesn't get the click is a tutorial on how to make backtests, on how to build those sheets that in the end figure out what historically worked well in the past. The backtest that I often show here on this channel. I still very much enjoy producing this kind of content though. I also share these kinds of sheets, but I don't do it on YouTube. You also get direct access to me. Feel free to check it out. It's thebitcoinstrategy.com. At the beginning, when you're starting out with investing, it's really not that important, right? Because you don't have that much money. Let's say you only have $5,000. It's not that bad if you lose some of that purchasing power because your wealth relative to your income isn't yet that big. And even that inflation really doesn't matter that much. But it's important to start in the early days. And I don't believe that's because you get all of this compounding returns, etc. Normally, income, if you work hard, increases even faster than inflation, right? It's not necessarily because of any compound effect. It's psychologically that you get used to some fluctuation in your wealth. If you're okay when you start out with $5,000, that your $5,000 might be $4,000 tomorrow and $6,000 the day after tomorrow. If you get used to those kinds of swings, then you will be also okay when your $50,000 turn to $40,000 and then to $60,000, right? You have to get used to relative swings. If you're not used to some kind of fluctuations in your wealth, you've got a problem deploying that wealth later on in your life. And it's super important later on in your life, right? Because once you've got, say, 2 or 3 years of income saved up, and suddenly you're losing, let's say you've got 3 years, you're losing 7% per annum in purchasing power, and that's all in cash. Now you're losing 21% of your annual income simply just due to monetary inflation, simply just due to debasement. 21% of your annual income. This might be your entire savings rate. So after 3 years of money saved up, and you're still saving 21% of your income, you're not getting ahead whatsoever in your wealth in terms of purchasing power if those 3 years are just in cash. This is how strong inflation is, right? $1,000 in cash is as expensive as a Netflix subscription. And 3 years of income might be as expensive as your entire savings rate. You might save 20% of your income and not get ahead whatsoever. You're simply just stuck, even though you're always putting money aside, simply because you can buy less and less over the years. So that's why it's important to start out. It's important to get used to volatility, and it's important to also get a feeling of how much of the volatility can be diversified away across asset classes. It's not necessarily important to start investing to outperform everybody, etc., but it is super important to at least keep purchasing power, to at least invest in the S&P 500. It's better to even beat monetary expansion, right? With technology stocks, right? For example, QQQ, the Nasdaq 100 ETF, tends to outperform monetary expansion. Of course, dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin also tends to outperform monetary expansion. There are certain ways to beat monetary expansion. If you've got a very cheap loan on a property, let's say that loan only costs 3 or 4% per year, and again, monetary expansion is on average 7%, then all the debt devalues over time, so you also make some money on that. So there is ways to beat the system, but this is more of an advanced topic. At the beginning, you simply just want to start off with investing. You want to be psychologically prepared for some volatility. And most people that have never done anything, they are not really comfortable with this, right? They just buy, say, the S&P 500, or they only buy an individual stock, and then they see it shoot up and crash and shoot up and crash, and their mind is totally wrapped around that volatility. They're always just following the stock prices every day. But this is not necessarily how to approach this, right? You simply just want to preserve your purchasing power at the beginning. And beating the market is a completely different beast, right? Beating the market is something that comes way later. That comes when you really get involved in this game. This is something that you should only wrap your head around once you are at the 2 to 3 year mark in savings, right? I always like to look at savings relative to income, because this is really what matters. When you've got 5 or 10 years of savings, right? Let's say 10 years of your income is now your net worth. Then a drop of 50% is really, really painful, because you can't just recover this from savings. If you've only got, say, 3, 4, 5 months of income saved up and then it drops, it's fine. The volatility isn't that bad because you can simply just save a bit more in the upcoming months and you're back again to baseline. So the amount of volatility that you can stomach also changes over time, and it's always relative to your income. It's always relative to the cash flows. So simply think about this, right? How much passive money do you now have just laying around that's not earning much? And then think about how can you invest this. If it's not yet a lot of money, simply just park it in Bitcoin or in the S&P 500. If it is already quite some money, if it's more than 1 year of income saved up, then think about how you can diversify this across asset classes. Make sure that at least at the 3-year mark, you are investing. You don't want to have 3 years of your income just in cash, because otherwise you're simply just throwing your money away to that inflation, to that hidden tax. And when you're beating 3% per annum, that you're fine, I have to give you the bad news. You're unfortunately not fine, right? You're going to have to live in smaller and smaller houses. You're going to be able to spend less and less on a plane ticket or on medical expenses or on educational expenses for your children potentially, right? So be wary about this. Be careful. Make sure that you catch up with at least 7% per annum. Also with your income, by the way, right? If currently you're only increasing your income by 3 to 4% per year, make sure that you renegotiate. Make sure that you potentially job hop, right? Change the job to then get to at least the 7% per annum, right? If you change your job every 2 years and you get an increase of 15%, and on top of that you get the inflation adjustment, then you should be somewhat getting ahead, right? Make sure that you don't stay lazy, that you're okay with just the inflation adjustment, because monetary debasement, unfortunately, is way higher than the official numbers. If it's your first time here, feel free to subscribe. Feel free to also join our Telegram channel. There's a Telegram link down below. Looking very much forward to seeing you on Telegram. And yeah, see you in the next video. Cheers.